I love reading biographies. Often I'll listen to the audiobook about biographies, but I love learning about how people, especially successful people, whether they were successful at business or life or they accomplished something great, I love learning what makes them tick. How did they get from where they were to what they accomplished? And I'm listening to an audiobook, reading a couple of books about Walt Disney because he accomplished so much, just an interesting guy. And so in that, I recently watched the movie Saving Mr. Banks, which is about Disney acquiring the rights to Mary Poppins. And I highly recommend this movie just to see how these two people, Walt Disney and the author, P.L. Travers of Mary Poppins, how their personalities clash and mesh and are very similar. Disney explains in his biography and also in this movie how growing up, his dad, who was an entrepreneur, which is interesting in itself, owned a newspaper route. And so his dad, being a cheapskate, basically is what he says, is he put his sons to work. Walt and Walt's brother Roy, they are the delivery route. And Walt explains in the freezing cold in Kansas City, Missouri, he has to go deliver papers twice a day. And he says he remembers his shoes were thin, he froze to death almost. He would wake up passed out in a snowbank. And Walt had to endure this, but he endured this because he was concerned. He was scared that his dad was going to spank him, basically, that his dad was going to get mad. His dad often lost his temper, and that scared Walt. And I think that was a big part of what made Walt Disney the man. Walt really enjoyed Disneyland. I mean, it was his favorite place, right? So if you've been to Disneyland or Disney World, you understand that. But my point is that we each have a story. You had some difficulty growing up, so whatever it was. It might have not been as intense as Walt Disney's, might have been more intense. I tell a story when I speak to therapy students, which I get the opportunity to do, which if you would like for me to come speak at your college or university where you either graduated from or maybe you're a student right now, I'd love to speak to a therapy class. So I did this here recently. I spoke to students who are going to be therapists, and I'm basically explaining how to be an entrepreneur, but also how to be a great therapist, how to be a great employee. Even if you don't go on to own your own private practice, how to be a great employee, a great worker. In that explanation, in that presentation, I tell the story about how when I grew up, I didn't grow up with privilege. We ate the government cheese and lived on food stamps, and I was raised by a single mom. So I give this explanation of, I always thought that rich people ate at McDonald's because when I would go stay with my grandparents on the weekends, sometimes we'd go to McDonald's. And I thought my grandparents were so rich. Well, they weren't. Not really. They both had a job, but I would say they were lower middle class, if anything. But we got to go eat at McDonald's. And my mom and I, we rarely ate at McDonald's because we were eating off food stamps, right? So we would go eat at McDonald's, and I thought, well, this is just what rich people must do. They must eat at McDonald's all the time because that's what I would do. That's what my 6-year-old self would do. I would eat at McDonald's every meal if I was rich. And so I explained that and how rich people really don't eat at McDonald's. But I further explain that story and bring it back around and explain how rich people sometimes do eat at McDonald's. So if you'd like for me to tell that story to your therapy class, I'd love to do it. But Disney explains in his biography how he admires one of his brothers. He had another brother beyond Roy. Roy helped him start the Walt Disney Company, but he had another brother who was a mailman. And in an interview, Walt Disney explains that how he sometimes envies his brother, the mailman, because his brother doesn't, and Disney says this, doesn't have to deal with payroll. And if you're a therapist who has a private practice, you've dealt with this. If you have any staff, you got to deal with payroll, whether it's where am I going to get all the money for payroll, or, oh yeah, I got to cut checks this week, or I got to figure out how to cut checks. I got to figure out the taxes. You've had to deal with payroll. And Walt Disney explains, my brother, he goes to work, gets there at 9, leaves at 5, off on the weekends. He has a great life. So that brings me back to a question or a statement that I explain in my webinars. In a webinar I do. And I've got a free webinar coming up on how to start a therapy practice, and I'll unpack this a little bit more. But we have to choose our pain. So Walt Disney chose his pain to be an entrepreneur, to be a business owner, to be a mogul. I mean, he's Walt Disney. His brother, the mailman, the letter carrier, chose his pain to work as a mailman. To, his ceiling of how much he was going to make was determined. I mean, he wasn't going to go beyond whatever a mailman can make. Whereas Walt Disney, he made a lot of money, didn't he? So you have to choose your pain. Do you want to settle for being a mailman? And there's nothing wrong with that. Or just being a staff therapist. There's nothing wrong with that. But there's pain that goes along with that. Or do you choose the pain that Walt Disney chose and create something extraordinary like Walt Disney did? Do you choose that pain? You got to choose one or the other. You're not getting out of this life without choosing some pain. I'm trying to choose the Walt Disney pain. There's pain that goes along with that. But I'd love to create something wonderful. Love to help you create something wonderful. That's why I want you to join me on a free webinar, which is at startatherapypractice.com/webinars, and you can register for that free upcoming webinar. So in choosing your pain, I want you to think about your life story. What happened in your childhood that is either propelling you or keeping you back from choosing the pain that potentially is going to make you great, is going to help you create something great? So watch the movie Saving Mr. Banks, and you'll see what I mean by that. And definitely subscribe to my podcast. It's called Start a Therapy Practice. And if you need any help in creating your private practice, starting or growing, automating that, send me an email, scott@startatherapypractice.com. Thanks for watching, and Godspeed to you in your practice.